requesting a trade from the Patriots, which literally doesn't affect the Minnesota Vikings in any other way outside of the fact that whenever someone requests a trade or if someone gets cut, instantly Vikings fans take to Twitter and say they want him on the Vikings roster, which isn't always probably the best fit for the team. I don't know. I mean, yes, wide receiver 3 is still a huge need. We'll probably cover that a little bit tonight, but we've seen what Mike Zimmer likes to do. We've seen what the offenses under the Mike Zimmer led team likes to do, and that's always heavy 12 and 13 personnel, run the ball down your throat, and then let that kind of establish the passing game for Kirk Cousins. But it's been slow, and I'm happy to connect on this and talk about the offensive side of the ball. But I'm looking forward to training camp in a couple weeks, because then we'll actually have some beefier news to hopefully talk about.
Yeah, 100% agree with you there. Training camp can't get here soon enough. We were texting before the show about how this is probably just a more of a, from our point of view, hey, we still exist type of show. Also, the joys of live streaming and the joys of technical difficulties. I don't think anybody heard anything I said, and then like the first sentence or two that you said. So I went ahead and got it fixed. They heard the rest of your shtick. If you since you missed mine, we're having technical difficulties. Shout out to Chris Paxitas for the Load the Box logo that's above my head or next to my head. And what else did I say? I said something else, but I don't care what it is. The 3 points that I had that I wanted to talk about were just expectations for the offense, because obviously we didn't do too much. I mean, we built on the offensive line, which I think is where we could probably appease your dad, Tom Day, by just talking about the offensive line for 20 or 30 minutes tonight. But I want to start with probably the most important player on this offense, and that's the quarterback of it. And I want to start by talking about Kirk Cousins. Jack, expectations versus reality is a really good time-tested meme template that gets used a lot. What are your expectations for Cousins this year versus what would you obviously like to see him do? I guess start with what do you want to see him do, but then, I mean, be realistic with yourself and with the viewers. What do you expect to see Cousins do this season?
I am fully a big season out of Kirk Cousins. Obviously, they get that extra game added. I think you're going to see a ton of help. I think from a defensive standpoint, I think Kirk Cousins might see the best defense that he's ever had on his team that he's played for. I know Washington struggled on defense. Washington struggled with the run game when he was there, and now he has an elite run game behind him. He has two absolutely insanely good weapons at wide receiver, up and coming tight end, and Irv Smith Jr. Last year, he completed 67.6% of his passes for 4,265 yards, 35 touchdowns, and 13 interceptions. I think it's going to be a little bit higher than that, and it's hard for me to say this because I think we have disagreed on this at times throughout the show, but I know you believe that Kirk Cousins can get the job done, that he is a good, legitimate quarterback. I've had this conversation several times that it just shows how slow the news has been that I've been talking the last couple of weeks about. Where does Kirk Cousins fit in on the top 10, top 12? Where does he rank? And I truly believe you can make the argument that he's anywhere from that like 8 spot anywhere down to like 12 or 13. I think there's a list of quarterbacks that are comparable to him. And I think Kirk should be considered going into this season potentially a top 10 quarterback. I think he's going to have all the pieces in place right now. Obviously, injuries could affect that. And they tried, at the very least, they're attempting to at least rebuild that offensive line. Could Christian Darrisaw come in and be a complete downgrade as a rookie from what Riley Reif was a season ago? Yes, that could happen. We still haven't seen a ton of him. He was kind of sitting out during OTAs and mandatory minicamp, and when he got in, he was with the twos, and that's just how the Vikings operate. They never let rookies kind of take the field immediately. We just saw the best season out of a rookie wide receiver in 2020 and Justin Jefferson. I know we'll get to him here shortly as well, but we saw the best season for a rookie wide receiver, and he was even eased into this offense. So that should just speak about kind of how they handle their business. But to get back to the point of the question you asked me, I have high expectations for Kirk Cousins. They go out and they draft Kellen Mond in the 3rd round. I think I saw an article today that had Kellen Mond ranked as the 13th best backup quarterback, and he hasn't even seen a snap in the NFL yet. So I think that's going to kind of light a fire in him. He's saying and doing all the right things, saying he's going to be a good mentor for Kellen Mond, which you like to hear out of Kirk Cousins. But at the same time, he knows if he goes out and he has a game like he did against the Atlanta Falcons where he throws 3-4 interceptions, that fan base is going to be jaw-jacking at him, and they're going to want to see that new shiny toy that they have in the garage in Kellen Mond. And I think that should honestly, hopefully, light a fire in him. He's been playing with Sean Mannion as a backup, who, if you want to go back and listen to some of the shows where I've talked about Sean Mannion, I've made myself very clear that I did not want him as the backup quarterback to Kirk Cousins. It was time to get a young, mobile type quarterback, gunslinging type prospect with a high upside that can kind of push Kirk Cousins, not necessarily push, but maybe he can get Kirk Cousins to that next level, get him playing a little bit pissed off, the anger that we've always talked about that we want to see him play with. Maybe that'll get him to that next level. He's already done great things on the stat sheet. And I think the puzzle is going to start to piece itself together this year because he has the defense. He has all the weapons on offense. And I think this could be the first year for Kirk Cousins in Minnesota where everything clicks.
Yeah, I think that Kellen Mond point is really important. And we've got a few things in the chat here that I'm going to get to in just 1 second. But I do want to talk about Cousins because what I want to see from him is I want to see him dominate off the play action, do all the things that he does when he's playing at a high level. But my expectations for this season are he's probably going to have 2 or 3 games that he's going to look absolutely terrible. He's going to look bad. It's going to be no good. And everyone's going to be screaming for Kellen Mond. Now, I promise I will not start saying anything about Kellen Mond until I'm going to say 5 weeks into the season. I'll give it that long. If he's bad for you got to remember the Vikings were 1-4 last season or something. We were not good. And at that point, I guarantee if we had a Kellen Mond as the backup, we would have had that conversation time and time again. If the season's a dud, why even play Cousins? Put Mond out there. Let's see what we have. They made the point with Kyle Hinton. A lot of people were calling for, if the season's a dud, just throw a bunch of different guys out there on the O-line and let's see if we have another Brian O'Neill on this roster that's going to, he's a developmental guy, and then they step in and they're really good. So I expect to see Cousins have a few bad games, but there's no excuses for him. And I do think he's good enough that he'll have a few bad games. Fingers crossed they don't come in the playoffs. Fingers crossed he gets them out early and then plays really well the rest of the stretch and into the playoffs. But I do think he is good enough to get it done. And that'll take me into the chat really quick. Chris Land giving us a what's up, buddy. And Jeffrey Lee Zimmerman saying, who is Jack Day? Looking good, nephew. Of course, referencing the famous interview with Jack Day on what was the show?
That was on the Power Trip on K-Fan.
The Power Trip, thank you. So yeah, on K-Fan's The Power Trip. But then going to Chris Land's other comments, he said he is good. Talking about Cousins, he is good. He's about the 13th best quarterback in the league. I think he's middle of the pack. My issue with Cousins has just always been, why settle for the most expensive middle of the pack quarterback when you could have a cheap best quarterback, when you could try and get your Mahomes or something like that. But we won't do the Cousins debate fully tonight. Go ahead.
I do think that I think he's a little bit higher in my rankings. I'd put him somewhere around 10 or 11. The guys that are kind of interchangeable with him, I have him slightly ahead of. I think he's right there with the Matthew Staffords of the world. I prefer him slightly over a Matt Ryan too. But I think what we're going to see this year with Kirk Cousins, it's going to make Kirk Cousins look like a better quarterback because people like to tie wins as a team to a quarterback stat, which should not be done. But I think the defense is going to bail him out a lot more this year than he's used to. We were expecting that to be the case in 2018 because we saw Zimmer's big bad defense in 2017 get the Minnesota Vikings to the NFC Championship game. Obviously, allowing 38 points that game was not ideal, and then it kind of went into a downward spiral from there, and you lose a bunch of guys because people are saying because of the Kirk Cousins contract. But then they go out and they completely juice this defense up, which we talked about in probably the last show we did a couple weeks ago. So make sure you go check that out, because we talked, essentially all we talked about was the defense, and I'm looking forward into talking about some of these playmakers next.
Yeah, so I'm going to be honest with you. Chris Land is in the chat, and he just asked a question that's going to take up the rest of our time tonight. Jeff Hawthorne says defense wins championships. I agree with him. I think Tampa Bay showed last season it doesn't matter if you can still win with defense in this league, and I think the Vikings agree with that sentiment. If you look at their offseason, I think they're doing the right thing of really big up front, really athletic in the middle, and then just good in the secondary. I think the secondary's been pretty consistent, what you need for a long time now. But Chris Land said, is he better than Tannehill or is he better than Kyler Murray? To me, no. Jack, what say you?
I would say I would put him and Tannehill probably very close together. I have Kyler ranked. I learned this in one of the debates I did recently. Some people were saying they don't have Kyler Murray as a top 10 quarterback, which was news to me, because I would 100% take Kyler Murray over Kirk Cousins. But I think Kirk Cousins and Ryan Tannehill are both very similar in very similar situations. They both put up pretty monstrous stats. I guess monstrous might not be, but good stats. Their stats are both good year over year. They both have a freak at running back, and now they might both have the top two wide receiver duos in the league now too, with Julio Jones and AJ Brown down there in Tennessee. So they're both in really similar situations, and I think they're very, very comparable. I think both of those quarterbacks are capable of winning the Super Bowl in the right situation.
But who's better? If you had to pick one to be on your team, money's no object. Who would you take? I would take Tannehill.
I'm gonna ride with Kirk Cousins personally.
Okay,
but they're very, very close for me.
I would go with Tannehill strictly because I think everything is very close until you get to athleticism, and Ryan Tannehill is a better athlete in terms of, scrambling and that kind of stuff than Cousins. It's not Lamar Jackson versus Tom Brady. It's not that big of a gap, but Cousins is nowhere. I don't think I think Tannehill would be considered mobile-ish. Like he's not a strict pocket guy, whereas I think Cousins is a strict pocket guy who will occasionally take a stroll outside.
Yeah, to take what you're saying one step further, I don't even know if it's an athleticism thing necessarily, and maybe you can look up the 40 times and maybe Tannehill is way faster, but I think it's more of a head on their shoulders type thing. I think Ryan Tannehill is willing to go out and get that extra yard, whereas a guy like Kirk Cousins, we've seen him play skittish before. We've seen him coward in the pocket. You don't see that out of Ryan Tannehill as much. I think Kirk Cousins might surprise some people even further this year with his athleticism. We saw it towards the end of the year last year where he can get out and he can make some stuff happen with his legs. He just doesn't do it as frequently, and maybe that's because he's constantly just thinking that there's going to be pressure in his face and he needs to get rid of the ball as fast as possible.
Yeah, and Chris Land is also saying in the chat, he asked about Stafford. Jack, you already said that you prefer Cousins over Stafford. I agree with that. I'm not a Stafford guy. I do think they're close-ish, but I'm not as high on Stafford as many people are. Amy Lamont, I shaved my face because I started a job that required me to shave my face. And Chris Land agrees with you on everything. I will say this, and then we're going to move on to Justin Jefferson because I do want to talk about Justin Jefferson and the wide receivers. He said Tannehill was bad in Miami. He had Adam Gase in Miami, and no one has ever played well with Adam Gase at any position. Nobody plays well with him as the head coach. He leaves, and teams get good, and it's just he's got to be an awful coach. It's probably not all him, but Tannehill has Patrick Mahomes-esque numbers since arriving in Tennessee. Having Derrick Henry helps tremendously. I'm not disagreeing with that at all. But moving on from quarterbacks, because we could talk quarterbacks for a really long time, I do want to get into the receivers for just a little bit, and then we probably will get out because we don't want to spend too much time. I think that Justin Jefferson, I held this stat. I can't remember where I held it, and if I think of it, I will make sure to give them credit. But this is not my own stat. Somebody else found this. If Justin Jefferson has identical numbers to what he did last season, where he did not start the first two games, he will shadow the record for your first 2 years, like receiving yards and touchdowns and all that stuff that Odell has a lot for. So I think Jefferson this season should be expected to have, I'm going to say, like 200 yards more at least, because he's going to play in he's going to stout 2 more games as well as get an extra game at the end of the season. I'm excited to see Justin Jefferson play this season. Another year in the system. He's going out there in mini camps, calling out Patrick Peterson, a Hall of Famer to be someday. And he's out there like Hulk Hogan, just pointing at him, saying, I want you right now. I'm running these drills against you all day. And then Justin Jefferson goes on his podcast, and maybe this is just being a good teammate, but Patrick Peterson goes on his podcast and says, yeah, he was boning me. Like, I was like toast out there because he was hitting me with moves I've never seen before. He said he has this move that's like a yo-yo step now. I'm excited to see him. I fell in love with him last year, and I will always be reminded by my brother and my family that when we drafted him, I was not happy because I did not like him. I'm in love with him now. Jack, I know you tried to talk me into the Justin Jefferson thing last season before the season started. I wasn't buying it all. He made me buy with his play. What do you expect from this kid? Does he emerge as the number 1 wide receiver this year?
I think teams are already going to be looking at him as wide receiver 1, which I think is going to be beneficiary to Adam Thielen, who I sent out a tweet like last week, and I was like, I just said, why does it feel like every single year around this time of year, people forget how good Adam Thielen is at football? I mean, it's every single year. Like, he's not even ranked in the top 15 or so wide receivers, which, yes, he's getting into his 30s now. But when he's healthy, he's been extremely productive. He's been the go-to target for Kirk Cousins when he's trying to sling touchdowns. Adam Thielen is out. I think he still had, I don't have his stats up in front of me, but I think he had like 14, 15 touchdowns last year. I could be really off on that, or I could be spot on. I honestly,
I'm looking it up now. While I've got the internet machine pulled up here, Tannehill ran a 4.65, Cousins ran a 4.84. So not like 0.2 seconds isn't like a huge gap in speed. It surprised me though. I forget Cousins is. God, why doesn't he run, Mo?
He has sneaky speed. I try to tell that to my friends, and they always say he's not mobile. It's not a lack of speed; it's a lack of willingness, and I think. He said that last year where he was working on like it's something to do with tennis and his mobility, and he was kind of utilizing that to help him become more mobile. I think we're going to see another step from Kirk Cousins in this game. But kind of going off of what you just said, I have extremely high expectations for Justin Jefferson in 2021. Like you said, he has 180 minutes of extra football that he didn't have last year. He has another year of chemistry now with Kirk Cousins with a full offseason leading into the season. Remember this, he didn't have a normal offseason last year, and he still went out and shattered rookie records that, hey, they belong to guys like Odell Beckham Jr. and Randy Moss, who are both pretty darn good wide receivers if you ask me. So I wrote an article. You can go check that out at kfan.com. I wrote an article yesterday. I think it's titled something along the lines of, it's Justin Jefferson is poised for a monster or another monster year in 2021. And I agree with you. I think you could see him going out and getting 1,600 yards, maybe raise the touchdown totals up a little bit, depending on who becomes that true red zone threat now with Kaya Rudolph gone. Is Irv Smith Jr., is Tyler Conklin going to take that over? Is Adam Thielen going to continue to just be a touchdown scoring machine? I don't know, but there is a ton of stuff to be excited for. We were super jacked up when we were talking about the defense a couple weeks ago. There's still a lot of stuff. Just because they didn't go out and make, I think the biggest free agency signing this year on the offensive side of the ball was Chad Beebe, which obviously wasn't a ton of money. So there's still a lot of pieces there that I think are going to help elevate Kirk Cousins. If that offensive line can get to, we've been saying this for 3-4 years now, but if that offensive line can just get to an average level of play, I think we're going to see huge things out of not only Justin Jefferson. We're going to see Delvin Cook have another career year. Adam Thielen, I think, is still playing at a high level. Amir Smith-Marset is getting a ton of buzz around camp. And I think Vikings fans should be extremely excited about both sides of the ball heading into 2021. We're going to leave special teams out of that so Jack can leave the show tonight happy, though. I don't want to get into kicking situations and stuff like that. We're just going to talk about how excited we are about the offensive side of the ball.
So let's see. Jeff Hawthorne is in the chat. Also, Chris Land says CBS has him ranked 8th in the league. I don't know if that's in a fantasy perspective or if that
Jefferson
is just
Thielen.
Jefferson is ranked 8th. Chris Land says he thinks he's 6th. I agree. I think he's right on the edge of that top 5 mark. Jeff Hawthorne says, I will take 500 or 600 more yards rushing than Jefferson having more yards this year. Jeff Hawthorne, I'm going to say on the opposite side of the ball, I would rather Justin Jefferson have like 500 less yards than he had last year, and our defense not give up as many yards rushing the ball, because good God, that was atrocious. But also, just because Stat Monkey Jordan, Adam Thielen missed one game last year, still had 14 touchdowns on the season. It was a career high for him. So really good year for him in the red zone. His yardage was down, but that's all right. I think that Jeff Hawthorne brings up rushing the ball, and really quickly, I will throw in there, I do think that Dalvin Cook, I'm not mad that we extended him, but it's getting tiresome having to constantly see him limp off the field and then miss 2 or 3 weeks. I think he blew his knee out the first year we had him. So I won't say he's never had a big injury, but it feels like his injuries are pretty consistently, he misses almost a month and then he comes back and he's fine. So I don't know if I'm supposed to be upset about that, but it would really be nice to see him play 17 games this season. And I know it's difficult because it's the longest season ever, but he's so good when he's healthy. He just can't seem to stay healthy for an entire season. It's genetics. It's nothing that the guy's doing wrong. He's just not built to stay healthy, and I really hope that he can figure something. I don't know if he modifies the way he runs a little bit, if he doesn't embrace as much contact. I don't know what the key to it is, but if he can stay healthy for 17 games, I really think he's a guy that could lead the league in rushing yards. I think he could go for 1,900 yards this season. And if he can really just have a good year, I don't care what the wide receivers do. If we can dominate that clock and play Zimmer's style of football, I do think this team is built for deep playoff success. Jack, what say you about the running game?
Yeah, same exact thing. There's a lot of excitement to go around on this offense, and some of that dips into the running game because you have Dalvin Cook, you have a very legitimate backup, I would say, in Alexander Madison as well. And then we have the newcomer. I don't know what to expect out of Kini Nwangu. I hope I'm saying his first name. I know his last name's Nwangu, but an absolute athletic freak. The Vikings took a chance on a guy who was a kick returner for Iowa State University, and go back and turn on some of the returns that he housed. He is, and there's also, if you go to what's the website, playerprofiler.com, it just kind of measures all of his athletic traits, and I swear to God, everything is above the 85th or 90th percentile. He's just one of those guys that didn't see a lot of playing time in college, but the Vikings are willing to take a chance on him because, hey, this guy's a straight up athlete. And quite frankly, they didn't have any athletes that they were willing to risk in the return game last year. With how deep that running back group might end up being, they can throw him back there. They can put Amir Smith-Marset back there, and they can have a little competition between those two in camp. And I think that could essentially kind of boost the special teams. I'm not ready to start talking. I'll say one good thing about the special teams, because I keep saying, I'm going to avoid talking about the kicking situation until at least training camp. We can get to that when the time comes. That's future Jack and Jordan's problem to talk about, not current our problem. But I'm excited to see what those two youngsters can do in the return game. That was kind of something we've, quite frankly, the team has lacked since Cordero Patterson left. Amir Abdullah has been fine at doing the job, but he's not as explosive as he was when he was coming out. I think he was a rookie out in Nebraska when he went to Detroit. He's not the same player that he was back then. Still like having him as kind of like a third down option on this team. So I could very much see the Vikings keeping 3 of them. But then you have CJ Ham, who's also going to fall under that umbrella. And there's no chance they don't have CJ Ham on the roster. I think we just talked about all the running backs without even mentioning CJ Ham, who's one of my favorite players to watch. And when he gets out in the flat and Kirk dumps it off, it's not the sexiest play in the world, but I enjoy that when CJ gets his hands on the football.
It's the dumbest. My family, we come up with a bunch of different nicknames. Some of them I'll never repeat on a show for the public to hear. Some of them I gladly will. And CJ Ham is one of them that every single time he touches the ball, my dad says, "Ham sandwich." And it's become tradition now at this point that, Cousins dumps it off and CJ Ham gets it and blows somebody up because golly. I could sit here and tell a CJ Ham story. I won't. Instead, I'll jump into the chat one last time. This is the last comment of the night. Chris Land says he thinks Cook is better than Christian McCaffrey and Saquon Barkley. And I agree 100%. I think McCaffrey is really dependent on the receiving game. He's a great running back. I just think he's more of like the receiving back. And I think Saquon Barkley is a little unproven to me. He's really good. I just like haven't
he's
seen
like
him.
the type of running back that like was built in a lab but has the injury concerns. Like the guy is an absolute freak athlete, hell of a running back, great in the receiving game, everything you want in a modern day running back. The guy just cannot stay healthy. And I think I was going to jump in when we were talking about kind of staying healthy with Dalvin Cook. It kind of sucks because when you have a superstar running back on your team, it sucks to say this. It's just the nature of the position. It's the position they take the most hits other than the offensive line that's colliding with someone on every single play. The running back takes the majority of the hits on the team. So it's the nature of the position. They knew what they were signing up for when they started becoming a running back when they were in middle school, high school, and now they're one of the best in the world because they work so hard at their craft.
Absolutely.
It just kind of comes with the position.
But you know what? I don't think people give Cook enough, and this is the last thing I'll say, and then I'll pass it off to you to get us out and get whatever you have off your chest. People don't give Dalvin Cook enough credit for how physical of a player he is. He is not just speed and an elusive juke. He is so incredibly physical. He trucks people down. He's not Adrian Peterson, but like he hits guys and you hear it. I mean, those gunshots when he, lowers his head and doesn't get a penalty for it because the NFL is screwed. But he's so physical. I love the way he runs. He fights for extra yards. He's always falling forward. Nobody ever talks about that. And that's why I think he's becoming underrated because everyone's like, oh, Nick Chubb. Like, okay, but like Dalvin Cook and Saquon Barkley. And it's like, but Dalvin Cook might be faster and is a little less physical. Like, I don't know. I'm a big Dalvin Cook guy. It just sucks that he can't stay healthy. But at the end of the day, King Henry reigns supreme. He will always be the best running back in the NFL. And I love him because he's won me so many fantasy leagues over the years. Before he had all the hype and stuff, he'd always late in the season start getting a bunch of cheesy runs. But anyway, that's all I have for this week. We'll talk again come training camp. That's when you'll hear my beautiful voice. Once again, you're about to hear Jack Day's final thoughts on the evening, and then we'll start talking when training camp happens. Oh, I might lie, and something crazy might happen. Kirk Cousins might get traded to San Francisco, or the alien abductions might happen. Something crazy happens. We will fire the stream up. We will be back doing the show, talking to you guys, bringing you our opinions on the crazy Vikings news that potentially could happen. And Jack, as I pass it to you, I have one question. Is there any Viking news? Have the Vikings signed Larry Fitzgerald yet? Do not lie to me. There are people watching.
I don't think there's anything currently. I'll let you know if I hear anything else. But like I said, it's been, not only is it quiet on our side paying attention to the Vikings, I think it's kind of quiet on that side of things as well. It seems.
I like what you told me earlier about I've just been staring at a blank document.
I've been trying to write, and it's like there's yesterday the Jefferson thing just kind of popped in my head, and I was like, I'm just gonna run with this because I literally haven't been able to think of anything, so I'm gonna run with it. But yeah, I don't have a whole lot. There's been stuff circulating Twitter that I really probably shouldn't even waste my time bringing up. Make sure you're following us on Twitter if you're not, at LTB Vikings. I'm not even going to bring it up because there's the Chargers stuff with Keenan Allen and Justin Jefferson. I saw Jets fans on Twitter saying that the Jets have a better roster than the Minnesota Vikings. And there's a lot of, it's that time of year where people are just, I think they're out there fishing on Twitter. They're looking for someone to interact with them and get in arguments. It's not worth it. I think the biggest thing that's circulated around Vikings Twitter over the last week has been the comparisons between Adrian Peterson and Dalvin Cook and who you'd rather have. Dalvin Cook might be a better, more well-rounded because he can do things in the receiving game. But, man, there were things that Adrian Peterson did that there's not a single current NFL running back in this league, maybe Derrick Henry, but he was just a different specimen. I think, yes, Dalvin Cook might fit more in this modern style offense, but Adrian Peterson is a first ballot Hall of Famer, and I'm not ready to say that about Delvin Cook. So it's that's hard for me. I'm always going to stick. I mean, Adrian Peterson kind of was the next Randy Moss for someone my age. We had Randy Moss when I was younger, and then Adrian Peterson was that superstar. He was that good. I mean, there's plays that stick out in my memory like a sore thumb, and maybe we could talk about the Brown or talk with this about the Browns guys at some point. But the infamous Adrian Peterson stiff arm, where he straight up took a guy by the helmet and threw him out of bounds in Cleveland, that was one of my favorite Adrian Peterson plays. Yes, he fumbled a lot, which was not ideal, but I'm ready to ride with the 2021 Vikings. I'm fully behind what they're doing. Adrian Peterson right now. Is this our way of saying that the Vikings should try to bring back Adrian Peterson for that third running back spot?
Do
just
it.
to kind of
Do
kind
it.
of fill a hole. Let him retire here. He wants to retire here anyways. Let him be here. But yeah, I don't have a whole lot to wrap up the show with. I think it's gonna be a couple slow weeks as well. I think the only news that I'll drop that has been circulating Twitter as well as the extension talks have been ongoing with both Harrison Smith and Brian O'Neill, both deserving. I think I speak for 95 to 98% of Vikings fans when I say I want Harrison Smith to finish his career as a Viking. I think that he's one of those players where if he goes off and plays somewhere else, it's just not going to sit right with me. It's going to be weird seeing him go anywhere, and he's going to end up going to he's going to
Seattle.
go to Seattle or Philadelphia or New Orleans or something. Then it's then I'm going to have to despise him for a few years. And I just don't want that to happen. So lock that deal up, get Brian O'Neill, your best offensive lineman, lock him up as well. The salary cap's going to skyrocket next year with fans coming back with the new TV deals. But other than that, that's all I had. I had fun with you talking about the kind of forcing the Vikings stuff out a little bit this week, talking about the offense. But I am very much looking forward to load the box this season. I think it's not only going to be a fun season for us, I think it's going to be a fun season for the Minnesota Vikings and their entire fan base. So make sure you're following along and watching every Wednesday night, and we'll keep dropping the news